Hi, it's Whitney, and I have a favor to ask. We are seeking to better tailor our podcast to meet your needs, so we're conducting a quick audience survey. The first time ever, actually. A link to the survey, which takes less than a minute, is in the show notes. And as a small gesture of appreciation, when you complete it, you'll get a free PDF listing 10 podcasts that can help with career changes. Thanks so much, and on to the show.
How will you disrupt yourself? How will you disrupt yourself? How will you disrupt yourself?
On today's show,
if I hadn't had that toughness in my life, I would have been home eating animal crackers for most of my. I mean, I wouldn't have tried to break out of his toughness. You can go either way, right? You can become a hopeless alcoholic, I guess, or you could say, I'm going to get on the other side of this.
Welcome to the Disrupt Yourself podcast, where we provide strategies and advice on how to climb the S-curve of learning in your professional and personal life, disrupting who you are now to slingshot into who you want to be. I'm your host, Whitney Johnson. Our guest today probably needs no introduction, but we'll give him one anyway. John Tesh is a veteran broadcaster, sports commentator, TV host, radio voice, and a touring musician. And even if you don't know his face and voice, you certainly know his musical compositions, many of which have been part of sports media for decades. John hosted Entertainment Tonight for a decade alongside Mary Hart and has a nationally syndicated radio show where he shares life lessons across 355 stations that reach 8 million ears. He also plays sold-out concerts around the world. That is a lot of S-curves. What you may not know is that John has survived cancer twice. Both were terrifying. One was almost a death sentence. But he survived, thanks to modern medicine. Also, because he made a choice to fight against extraordinary odds. John has written a memoir called Relentless: Unleashing a Life of Purpose, Grit, and Faith. I was thrilled to sit down with him and discuss his career, diagnoses, struggles, and the formative experiences that drove him. John, I am so excited to be talking to you, and I would love for you to start by sharing a few of your formative experiences.
I'm a Long Island boy who finished in the middle of my class. And so you're going to have to explain what the heck formative experience is, and then I'll take it from there.
All right. So early experiences that left a mark on you. How's that?
All right. There we go. Okay.
You got that. All right.
Good. Thank you. It was being raised by tough parents. I was born in 1952. My dad was a World War II veteran, really a hero in the battle at Okinawa. He was the guy with the headsets on who called in the airstrikes on the kamikaze pilots and also the Japanese Zeros who were trying to kill him and everybody in the fleets. A bloody, horrible battle. And he came back and I'm sure he had PTSD before we invented PTSD. And so he was like, did his own tax returns, cut his own yard, planted his own garden. When the missile crisis came, he dug us a bomb shelter underneath the house, which is great, by the way, when you're a teenager, great place to hide. And then built our basement and all the rest of that stuff. And my parents didn't know where our school was. It was, I had to draw them a map for parent teacher day. And there was no helicopter parenting or anything. It was get out there and do something. And then when the street lights come on at night, you come home. All right. And if you're not home by the street lights, then you go outside in the back, you cut a little branch off the tree and you bend over and I'm going to hit you with that branch and then you won't do it again. Which is called a switch, because they were from North Carolina. But that combined with the fact that, especially in junior high and high school, well, in junior high and elementary school, I was a scrawny kid. I mean, I'm 6'6", I weigh 220 now. In junior high, and I think I went through this in the book as well, I was 6'6" in junior high. Jeans didn't fit me, shoes didn't fit me, and I was 152 pounds. So I was very available on Sadie Hawkins Day, if anybody remembers what Sadie Hawkins Day.
Yes,
the only guy who in school. So what happened was, there are books that are written about this, sort of the gift of imperfection, right? So I spent a lot of time in my basement with an 8mm movie camera, a reel-to-reel tape recorder. For some reason, my dad had that, and an upright piano. I just sort of naturally tried to emulate the Dave Clark Five band and the Beatles, and later the Doors, because nobody was paying attention to me, and I had all this time on my hands. I was always trying to get out of that basement and get noticed. And so if you look at that metaphor and overlay that, look at my life through that lens, I think you can understand the decisions that I've made.
Get out of the basement and get noticed.
Get noticed meant having a trophy to bring my dad, who was really not, if you got a B, it was, where's the B plus? People who are my age, they understand that. But there was no like, hey, here's a trophy, you participated. There is never that,
It sounds like your dad was really strict, and reading your book, your mom was a bit gentler. And a war hero, very serious about you accomplishing things. And I remember in the book, you talked briefly about, for him, music wasn't really accomplishing something. And so how did that play out?
First of all, everybody in the 1960s was in a garage band. If you weren't in a garage band, you were in a theater group. So I was in a garage band. It was called The Best of Both Worlds. It was a Blood, Sweat, and Tears cover band. So I played trumpet and also Hammond organ in that. But that was always seen by my dad, not as a vocation, but as a hobby. I guess I should have known that early on when he came to some of my recitals and things like that, but it was just sort of, he always had a Kent cigarette hanging out of his mouth and a highball glass of scotch, he'd walk by us in the garage, playing Hold On, I'm Coming by Sam and Dave, and just sort of shake his head and move on. And so when it came time to go on those college trips that everybody loves, where you just get your friends and you get in the car and you go across the country and you visit Donnie Holman's college and you visit Paul Abbott's college and you visit Eric Garnett's college, and you get the T-shirts and everything. And all the colleges that I picked were all performing arts schools, including Interlochen in Michigan. And I had a scholarship, partial scholarship, to go to Kansas to play brass instruments. I was also in the marching band. I was in the marching band because I couldn't be a football player because I would break. I was so skinny, so I couldn't get insured. But when I mentioned this to my dad that I was going on the trip, he sort of laughed and he said, "Well, Johnny," I said, I have a surprise for you. And I said, "Well, what's that?" He said, "Well, I've enrolled you in North Carolina State University," which to me was a whole world, a universe away, in Raleigh, North Carolina, in textile chemistry. And when you finish that, when you come out, I'll have a job waiting for you. My dad worked his way up in a Hanes organization. He was vice president of the underwear division of Hanes. And so he wanted me to follow in the family footsteps of, to quote Young Frankenstein, of being the underwear, making underwear. And so I was like, "Oh," and he goes, "Yeah, you can be in a band, all you want, but that's what you're going to do." In fact, I applied early admission for you. And so I was in North Carolina State early admission. And then my parents were, even though they're on Long Island, they're pretty frugal. And my dad was able to transfer, and my mom and dad moved back to North Carolina where they were from. And so we ended up getting in-state tuition, which was like $400 a year or something like that. And I'm like, whoa, wait a second, what just happened? But he was a powerful guy. And, I would always look, you referenced this earlier, but I always looked at my mom like, "Mom," but she would not. Betty Friedan wrote a book that I mentioned in my book, which is called The Feminine Mystique. And it's a really interesting book. If you want to go back and look, you probably have read it, you go back and look at history, is that back in those days, 1950s, early 60s, in the suburbs of America and the suburbs of New York, right out of New York City, 20 minutes on the Long Island Railroad, were really just being formed. And what happened was women who got married, it was instantly assumed by everybody, not just the family, that they would quit their job and raise the family. Now, my mom was a ranked tennis player and was also a surgical nurse. And she quit her job as a nurse and raised us kids. And Betty Friedan described a woman like my mom as, quote unquote, being buried alive in the suburbs. And I get chills every time I say that, because it helps me understand now why she made the decisions that she did. She didn't go against my dad. If my dad had been drinking one night, she didn't suggest that he go to a mental institution, which was popular back then. And then she hid all of this stuff from all of her friends, including trying to do it from me as well, when there was all the arguing and when my dad was just really hard on my sisters. When I first started laying this out for HarperCollins, the publisher of the book, they gave a rundown of what they wanted to promo, and it said it lived in an abusive household. John did, I'm like, whoa, wait. What you described was an abusive household. I said, no, it was a confused household. My dad was doing his best. My mom was doing her best. They were living in a society that dictated what they should be doing at the time. But if I hadn't had it, and my dad proved this later in my life, if I hadn't had that toughness in my life, I would have been home eating animal crackers for most of my. I mean, I wouldn't have tried to break out of his toughness. You can go either way, right? You can become a hopeless alcoholic, I guess, or you could say, I'm going to get on the other side of this.
In your book, you reference Angela Duckworth's Grit. And one of the things that I thought of as you were talking, having read that book, which is terrific, is that she talks about her parents and how one of her parents was really tough and one of her parents was very gentle. And as I hear you talk, it makes me think there's an interesting alchemy in there of one parent who's like, we're going to do it like this. The other one's like, no, you can do it. You'll figure it out kind of thing. And putting those two together helped make you who you are. And all that grit that you've needed throughout your career. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I would agree. I would say an amen to that. I think you're absolutely right. And my mom, she would never even speak against my dad to me. It wouldn't be like, hey, don't do this, don't do that. But she showed love the way a lot of parents show love, where she would always make sure that if I came home late for soccer practice, it was easier to get insured to be a soccer player. If I came late home from soccer practice, she wouldn't just have cold food waiting for me. She would make a meal for me, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. The love of her husband was, she tried to hide his inequities, and they were deep. The alchemy was shown in a different way, but I felt the love, but my sisters and I both, and we've talked about this before, like, why didn't you stand up to him? Well, she couldn't.
You alluded to Brene Brown and Gifts of Imperfection. What I love about it is the gifts that come to us because of our own imperfection, but also the gifts that come to us because of the imperfection of our parents and the people that came before us and the gifts that come along. All right. So let's talk a little bit about another formative experience, or an experience that made a mark on your life. You're now at North Carolina State and you meet a fellow by the name of Steve Thomas. And he was a really important figure in your life. Talk about him for just a moment.
Steve was on the same floor as I was in the dormitory room at North Carolina State. And, you're just sort of trying to find your way through. And Steve had a scholarship, a full scholarship as a soccer player, a defender at North Carolina State, which is a Division I school. So you're talking about a big school. He was sort of big man on the floor of our dorm room. And we became friends because he was from New Jersey and I was from New York. And we bonded over that. And we would talk late at night and we'd go on double dates and stuff like that. And at one point, Steve said, hey, why don't you try out? I was having a hard time in school in textile chemistry, as I mentioned earlier. And I was hovering around like a 2.1 at that point.
Well, because you didn't want to be there, right? I mean, you did not want to be at this college and majoring in what you were majoring in, right?
Yeah, I was. I mean, talk about being buried alive. Yeah. I was basically, I mean, it was, listen, I wanted to be studying music theory and performance. And Steve said, hey, you played for a really good soccer team on Long Island. Why don't you try out for the NC State team? And I'm like, are you out of your mind? And he goes, well, no, come on. I'll introduce you. I mean, you played fullback defender in Garden City. Why don't you come try out for the team? I said, Steve, I'm not doing this. Well, just come and watch. And so I came and watched practice, and he was the captain of the team. Steve was. And I mean, he's the guy who would like run 2 miles around the field before they even started practice. I'm looking at this team, I'm going, oh my gosh, this is crazy, And so in the middle of all this, he brings me over to Coach Max Rhodes and says, hey, this is John Tesh from back on Long Island. He was on a great soccer team at Garden City High School, and he's a terrific defender. You should give him a tryout. And a tryout, and Max loved Steve. So he's like, yeah, okay, fine. And he looks down at my shoes, and he sees these white sneakers. And he goes, do you have any cleats? And I said, no, sir. And all of a sudden I'm in this thing. I was like, wait a second, I'm not trying out, and he goes, go see Chester inside and get a pair of cleats and some shorts and a shirt in your size. And after practice, we'll go through some stuff. And I'm like, what in the heck has just happened? And so I did. They started firing balls at me at the goal, and I was doing a pretty good job, And so they said, come to practice. And so here I am. All of a sudden, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm not studying chemistry right now, or physics or making underwear. And Steve, it was just because Steve risked his reputation by saying, come on, just because you wanted to play soccer with me, And I got to tell you something, I went nuts. I mean, Steve and I ended up at the same fraternity later, and I just talked to him yesterday. We've been friends forever. And there was another guy that played on the team, Mark Templeton, who's this amazing CEO. And with three of us stayed in touch ever since 1970. Just about every hour of the day, if I wasn't practicing piano in one of the practice rooms, I was on that soccer field. I mean, I kicked the soccer ball, even did this as a kid. I'd kick the soccer ball against a wall. I would pretend was this player, was that player. Steve would work with me and everything. And then, the first year of that team on the Division I NC State team, we had a banquet, and I got some playing time against the bad teams. But during the end of year banquet, I was presented with the most improved player trophy. I mean, that was like, what? So I didn't have a scholarship or anything, but I was a walk-on at NC State on the soccer team, and nobody could take that away from me. And it was an amazing gift that Steve gave me in my life. And then he gave me one more, which changed my life forever. And that was when he knew that my grade point average was really horrible, and that I probably wasn't going to be able to stay on the soccer team, because if you hover under 2.0 for a while, you can't play varsity ball at a school that size. And so he said, listen, I found this course, and it's an easy A. And they had my attention, right? And so I said, what is it? He goes, Television and Radio 101. And we took that course together. It was worth 3 credits and a lab. So it was 4 credits. And I got bit by the bug. We were making TV shows and radio shows, and we were editing film with razor blades and stuff. And I stopped going to all the rest of my classes and just spent all my time at the campus radio station. And that's when my life flipped forever.
You said you're still friends with him. When you tell him what that meant to you, of him just basically bringing you along as a friend, what does he say? What's his reaction to that?
He said, I really didn't do anything, Tesh. You had it all inside you. He said, I saw something and thought that I wanted to hang out with you. I mean, that was really it. I wanted to be, it was just pure friendship. And when I was going through all of my cancer battles, what happens when you have a terminal diagnosis, which really was what mine was in 2015. Some people run for the hills, and no condemnation, but even family members, they don't know how to deal with it, right? And Steve would text me, and he lives all the way on the other coast from Los Angeles, and he would text me every day. He and Mark Templeton both, and just checking on me. These were my buddies. I don't really have that many friends, believe it or not. My wife and I are so close that I've sort of blocked out even any room for any close friends, other than people that I grew up with like that. Grew through horrible times because there was a time when I was homeless as well. But when I wrote about him in the book, he was touched. He was definitely touched because he's a writer.
So what's Mark Templeton the CEO of?
He's the CEO. Was the CEO of Citrix Systems. He just retired, and now he's having grandkids. But we had to talk on Zoom, and the two of them would plan Zoom calls when I was sick. Yeah. And they just weren't afraid of it. And like I said, that's listen, those of you who are listening to the two of us right now, have a friend who is sick, and there's so many people who are sick right now for whatever reason, is, this is the number one thing not to do if you want to take it from somebody who's been through it. Don't text somebody or call somebody and say, let me know if there's anything I can do. Do not say that ever again, because what you've just done is you've given me a job. I have to find something for you to do. I have to find if it's going to make me guilty. I got to find out if you can do it. Don't check that box. Just do it.
Okay, we're going to come back to the cancer in a minute. Although you're not going to go back to cancer, but we're going to come back to the discussion of cancer in just a minute, because you just dropped this little bomb in here that we cannot let pass by. And I think we can tie two of these pieces together: becoming homeless and how you got your first radio job. So if you want to tie those two stories together.
Sure. And boy, are they tied together. Yeah. What happened when I took the radio and TV job with Steve Thomas, I got bit by that bug. I was it's, you know what it was? Again, through the lens of me being in the basement with an 8mm camera and a reel-to-reel tape recorder and Mr. Microphone. And the other thing I left out was that when I was really young, I got from my uncle Charlie, I got a Heathkit radio. And for people old enough to remember, it was a toy, right? But it was a radio, a broadcasting radio. And I think the FCC has like condemned them now, but it comes with the diodes and the resistors and all the rest of that stuff. And you actually, in a plastic container, you build a radio station with an antenna on it, and then it has a microphone. And when you're done with your Heathkit, it wasn't just radio. You could build anything. You could build an amplifier for your turntable. But when it was done, you could broadcast your own radio show into your dad's car if it was in the driveway. And back in the day when there weren't so many radio stations, there was a space between the big ones, whether it's, WNBC and WABC, whatever. There was like the space between them sounded like this, But if you tuned your radio to that fuzz, and then dialed in your Heathkit radio, you had a radio station in your dad's car, and so
that must have been heady as a kid.
It was amazing. It was amazing, and I thought about that because ultimately I went on to announce the Olympic Games, two of those things, years and years later. People were saying, how did you learn how to be an announcer? I said, I broadcast into my dad's car. But anyway, so I got bit by that bug, and then I realized that I needed to change my major to television radio, to communications. I didn't have a television radio major, but it was communication. And so I went around to all my professors. When you mentioned drop ad card, I don't even know if they still exist, but when you mention drop ad card to people who are of my age, they understand what you're talking about. And so I went around to all my professors and said, this is my passion, this is my mission, this is my purpose, is communications. I know we're past the drop ad date, but can you please sign my drop ad card? And they were like, yeah, of course, we want you out of this course anyway. You're terrible. You're just bringing down my average. And I got to my statistics professor. I can't find this guy. I need to find him to thank him. But I got to my statistics professor. And he said, no. We're past the drop ad thing. And you have a C+. You can probably get a B. You should try harder. I'm not signing this card. And I said, please, everybody else is signing. He said, no, I'm not doing it. I said, well, I'm not going to be able to change my major for another year. And he's like, no, I'm not doing it. He held the line, right? By the book guy. So I went back to my fraternity house with Steve and everybody else, and I told him a story. And I won't mention any names, but there were fraternity brothers who were like, "What? This guy's crazy! I just dropped 4 classes today and signed the professor's name to it. Just sign his name to the card. He's never going to check. They never check." Another guy said, "Oh, I do this all the time, And when I went back to these guys later, they were like, "No, we've never done that." Anyway, I signed my professor's. I may have had a beer. I can't remember. But I signed my professor's name to the drop ad card, turned them all in, and sure enough, everything went great. Like I was able to change my major. All the courses on my next report card, they were all dropped, and I'm at home with my parents, for the summer. And it was time for my report card to come, and I was very excited, And what happened was the report card didn't come. It was very late, but a letter came from the chancellor of North Carolina State University. And the letter, my father called me into his office with the oak wood table and said, "Johnny, sit down." And I said, "I think I'll stand." And he said, "Okay, let me just read you this letter." And he wrote me a letter from the chancellor of North Carolina State that basically said I had broken the honor code at NC State by forging a professor's signature, that I was being suspended indefinitely from NC State and given an F for the course. And I thought, oh, wow, the cat's out of the bag here, and blood was draining. But it got worse, where my father just said, listen, you have shamed me. You have shamed your mother. You've shamed her church group and her bridge group. He had a whole list. And you have shamed, this actually happened. You've shamed the entire underwear division at Hanes. My little crazy mind, my dark mind is going, how bad do I have to be to shame an underwear department? But I didn't mention that. And he said these words. He said, "You're no longer welcome in this house, in my house. I'm sorry, you're no longer welcome in my house." And he said, "I got to get your belongings." I had a Volkswagen. He said, "Get in the car, and you can go wherever you want, but you can't live here." And my mom was doing the buried alive thing, the feminine mystique thing. She was by him, and she was sort of like, he couldn't see her, but she was like making those faces that you can't see right now. But it was. There's nothing I could do. Basically, it was the message she was sending. But when I got in my car the next morning, it took me a while to pack my Jimi Hendrix records up. When I got in my car the next morning, there was a whole it must have been 3 pounds of fudge that she had made and put on the passenger seat.
Oh.
She was probably thinking I needed that for energy. Thanks a lot. It was like 3 pounds of fudge. And I didn't know anything better to do. I drove back to North Carolina State, which was about 3 hours away from where my parents' home was at that point. And I had my Boy Scout pup tent. I pulled up at a park, and I had a Coleman lantern, and I bed down for the night. I said, well, I'm going to tough this out, and maybe I'll figure something out. But it was really the wrong place to be, because here I was in a pup tent, and I was pumping gas at college Esso. It was Esso back in to try and support myself. But everybody was pulling up to get their car filled up that I'd gone to college with. So it was brutal. It was like self-immolation or something like that. Because what happened to you? My girlfriend broke up with me. It was just, I was a pariah,
Mm-hmm.
And so this went on for months and months. And I was just, I went to the library every now and then trying to find books that I could read that would lift me up. And I found some good ones, mostly biographies, but I finally decided.
Do you remember, was there a biography in particular?
Well, there was a biography that I reread. My first biography that I ever checked out of the library at Garden City Junior High School was the biography of Houdini. Believe it or not, I don't know why, but what better biography to reread than a guy who was escaping from stuff? And so I reread that. I think there was also a Ben Franklin, letters of Ben Franklin. Eventually, I can't remember when this happened, but I did one of my favorite books to this day is Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. And I just thought, I got to do something. I was praying the Lord's Prayer every night for guidance. And I said, I have to do something. So I still had a connection at the campus radio station. And I went to my friend who was running the place at the time, or the student who was running the place at the time. And I told him what had happened. He's like, man, that's a bummer. I said, yeah, it's sort of beyond a bummer at this point. He said, well, what can I do to help? And I said, you can give me the key to the radio lab and let me get in late at night. He goes, you're not a student anymore. And I said, yeah, right. He goes, that's illegal. And I said, yeah, it is. I said, you're my only hope. All of a sudden, I was Princess Leia with Obi-Wan Kenobi. So, help me, Bob. You're my only hope. And so he said, okay, but I'm going to leave the key under the mat. But if you get caught, you don't mention my name, and you mention that you stole the key. And I was already a criminal, so I said, what the heck? So yeah. So I got in there, I don't know, like 3:00 in the morning one time. I mean, midnight to 3, because I had to get out because the cleaning crew was coming in. And in front of me was a reel-to-reel tape recorder, which I was familiar with, a microphone, which I recognized. There was an upright piano in there, completely out of tune, which I also knew how to deal with. And there was a manual typewriter there. And I set about creating a fake radio broadcast, because I knew from talking to other people that you can't just get on the radio in Raleigh, North Carolina. You have to have a demo tape. And I hadn't made a demo, other than that from just being in that class. I hadn't made a demo tape. So I went in there, and with those tools, I created a fake broadcast. And it was, I played the NBC theme on the out-of-tune piano. I used the typewriter, because back in the day, there was a teletype that actually was a typewriter that hit keys. It was I did that. I used the microphone and the reel-to-reel tape recorder, and then I imitated all the voices that I had heard on the radio in Raleigh on a station called WKIX, and when their newscast was on. And so it was basically, and then it was called 2020 News, 20 minutes after the news, 20 minutes before the news on WKIX. So I customized it for that station. And you said, I did the bam, 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 NBC, what? And I said, this is John Tesh, WKIX 2020 News. Today, Dr. Henry Kissinger had this to say about the possibility of peace in the Middle East. Let's switch you live now to correspondent Maurice Gindy. Now, Maurice Gindy was a correspondent for UPI during the time. We switch you live now to correspondent Maurice Gindy with a live report.
This is Maurice Gindy in Cairo. Today, Dr. Henry Kissinger had this to say about the possibility of peace in the Middle East.
I think that there is a possibility of peace in the Middle East.
That was Dr. Henry Kissinger on whether or not there's a possibility of peace in the Middle East. Back to you in the studio, John.
Thank you, correspondent Maurice Gindy, John Tesh, 2020 News. Let's switch you now to sports. And then I play like a on the piano. And I gave a couple of scores. The NC State soccer team. Oh, NC State soccer team today scored and won. Led by John Tesh. I said, all right, thank you very much, Bill. We switch you live now to the helicopter traffic report and Jimmy James. And then with my chest, it was, oh, John, traffic is really heavy on the I-40 today. We've had a couple of really bad crashes, and there's the sheriff's office is on the way now. It looks like they're clearing it out. Everything should be fine by about 2 o'clock. Back to you in the studio. Thank you so much. I forgot everybody's name. Thank you very much, Bill. John Tesh, WKIX 2020 News, and then back with the NBC. Boom, boom, boom. And so I had my thing, right? This went on forever, by the way. It wasn't just what I did there, because it would be too much if I did the whole thing. It's already too much. And so I made a couple of dubs of it, took the reel to reel, showed up at WKIX, tried to get a meeting with Scott White, the news director. And the lady at the front desk said, no, I had hair down on my shoulders, right? And I was a homeless person. I said, well, can you just please give Scott White this tape? It's my demo tape to be a newscaster here. And she goes, oh, really? I said, yeah, I'm homeless right now, living. This was it. This was the thing that really sealed it. I'm homeless right now. I got kicked out of school, and I'm living in a park, in Umstead Park, and this is my only chance to get out of the tent. Right? When you show up at the animal shelter and there's the dog in the back that nobody wants to adopt, that was it. She was like, oh my gosh, how did that happen? I said, it's a really long story, and I'll tell you about it when I get hired here. She's like, oh, that's very funny. I said, no, I'm serious. And she goes, okay, I get it. I'll get him the tape. So about a week later, I left a phone number for my payphone that was right next to the tent. And about a week later, my phone rings, and I pick it up and I go, hello. And he goes, is this John Tesh? And I said, yes. And you could hear laughter in the background, like it was a conference room or something like that. And he goes, hey, where am I calling you now? And I'm like, my office. And so he says, did you make this tape yourself? And I said, yeah. And he goes, yeah, it sounds like it. Are you doing all the voices? And I said, yeah, everything on this tape. And I said, yeah. He goes, listen, I think I need to meet you. And so we set up a meeting. And I want to tell you something. One thing led to another, where they gave me a chance on the weekends I played the religious tapes on Monday mornings at 4 o'clock in the morning. And I don't even remember if I told this in the book, but I'm going to tell you because it's terrible. And now we're friends. I would play the religious tapes. They had these real tapes because there was a public service requirement from the FCC where you had to play religious tapes in the morning for like 3 hours on Sunday. So I did that. And it was the Billy Graham tape and all the rest of these tapes. And they're huge, giant, real tapes that went on for like 2 hours. And I would listen to this stuff, and it was great, because it was great messages and everything. But I thought, how am I going to get a job as an announcer? And so a couple of times I played razor blade roulette. Again, I was already a criminal. So I just would close my eyes and take the razor blade and make a nick in the tape, like somewhere, in the second hour. And at about like an hour 45, all of a sudden the tape would snap and you'd hear as the tape rewound on the air. I'd turn it off, and then I would switch on the live microphone that was right there in the studio. Go, oh my gosh, we've had a technical malfunction. So sorry. We'll get back to Billy Graham again next week. But and I actually have mentioned this to Billy Graham when I interviewed him once, and he was like, "Oh, I'm just glad to be of service, John." And so I did a whole show. I did like an hour show where I played music and I read some of the newscasts and everything. So nobody really heard it. I mean, I'm sure some people heard it, but nobody at the station heard it because they were sleeping. After about 3 weeks of this, Frank Maruca, who was a very scary Italian man, called me into his office and he goes, John Tesh, right? Because I hadn't even met the general manager of the station. I go, yes, sir. And he goes, I know what you're up to. And I said, sir? And it could have been anything, because I was up to a lot. And he goes, you know what I'm talking about? And I said, just give me a hint, And he said, well, the tapes are breaking for some reason. They've never broken before, but we have a lot of tapes that are breaking, and then you're on the air for an hour. And I said, yes, sir. I really apologize. I've gone, beyond my limits here, and I understand if you want to let me go. And he goes, well, we're barely hiring you now. He said, but I've talked to Scott White, and he wants you to do the news on Sunday evenings and give you a shot. because you sound pretty good on the air. And I said, thank you, sir. He goes, fine, but don't ever mention this to anybody ever. I said, okay. So that's how I got my first job. Not everything that has happened to me has been at the hands of nefarious circumstances, but I'm sorry I talked for so long. It took me a while to get all that out.
You razor blade roulette on the religion channel that gets you the job.
You always pull out the headlines, don't you?
That is hilarious. Okay, and it wasn't in the book, by the way. So everybody,
no, because I don't know what the statute of limitations is on ruining religious tapes. I mean, listen, I'm a God-fearing man, so I don't. I've already asked for forgiveness and moved on.
Yeah, I'm sure that the statute of limitations on forgiveness is you're probably good.
Okay, thank you.
In our work, we talk about the S curve of learning, which is a model for you to think about what growth looks like. So start at the bottom. You don't know what you're doing. You move into the sweet spot. So like on that radio station, then you get into the sweet spot on the radio station, and then you get into mastery and you're really good at something. And can you talk about a time, and I'm thinking of when you were recruited to CBS, where you're at the top of an S curve, you're really good at it. You could do it in your sleep, not when everybody else is sleeping at 4 a.m. in the morning, but when you're asleep and you think, I've got to do something different. Can you talk about what that looked like?
I didn't figure that out myself. It was figured out for me.
Mm.
So I was about 6 years into being a correspondent at CBS News. And when you look at that, when that happens in your life at 23, I was the youngest correspondent at WCBS TV. In the newsroom was John Stossel, Meredith Vieira was in there, Linda Ellerby, right at the end of my stint. Brian Williams came in, Bill O'Reilly replaced me and then went on to 60 Minutes and everything else that you know about Bill O'Reilly. It was a hotbed of really talented people. And back in those days, you couldn't even get your piece on the air unless you jumped over those people. You know what I mean? I mean, there was only so much time. You got paid a stipend, basically, salary for just being there. But you wouldn't get an AFTRA bonus unless you got your piece on the air. And then if you got it on the 6 o'clock and the 11 o'clock, then you got paid twice as much. And so you could go from $30,000 a year to $200,000 a year if you were one of the, back in 1976, if you were one of the top correspondents. And so I was the junior guy, and so I was hustling and trying to find my place and everything. And they did a thing called the newscaster, still my friend, Steve Cohen, and Ed Joyce, who originally hired me. They came up with a thing called the Tesh Report. And they wanted me to do it because I was the youngest guy on the team. They wanted me to wear a leather jacket and go and just investigate stuff, And before that, I'd been studying. I had been reporting on fires and explosions. I was a great fire and explosives reporter. And in New York in 1976, 77, a lot of that was happening. I was the first reporter to cover what was known as the 44 caliber killer, which became the Son of Sam story, which you've seen in the book, which was also a revelation moment for me of how to deal with people who were going through tragedy. So this Tesh Report thing with me in the leather jacket, it was at CBS News, right? And this was a time, and I actually I felt like I needed to put this in the book. One of the editors said, it's too much information, but to understand what I was doing and what was happening in the world of local news, you have to understand what was happening with local news itself. And it became happy talk news. And not so much in New York, but every place else, where all of a sudden there were news themes and there were news sets and there was news music and themes and all the rest of that stuff. And there was something called participatory journalism. So a lot of this happened in New York City, the participatory journalism part of it, and was led by Geraldo Rivera, who put himself in fact, he was so popular in New York here I'm competing with him and somebody known as Joan London, as you know, who was a terrific reporter, as well. He put himself inside all the stories, in fact, so much so that when people were in a hostage situation once in New York, all of us reporters are down there in front of this, huge building, and the guys, the hostage taker, the perp, is leaning out of the window going, I want to talk to Geraldo. It's like, okay, now we've gone too far. But so with the Tesh Report thing, I became a homeless man. I lived, there was through a one-way mirror in a van. one-way glass in the van. I became a homeless person on the streets of New York in sub-zero temperatures to outline the plight of the homeless back then, which was really it's as bad as it is now, but cold at the same time. So that was really exciting for a while. But then it was just like, I don't know, I was playing piano late at night in jazz clubs and stuff. And I thought, I don't know, where am I headed now? And I was also anchoring the news on the weekends. And I still was a great job. People recognized me. I got tables at, in New York City for dinner. And I got a phone call in the newsroom. And there was a guy named Terry O'Neill called me and told me it was him and a guy named Van Gordon Sauter. And they had just taken the reins over at CBS Sports, the network. And as a journalist, you're always like, can I go to the network? But anyway, I always thought that might be, 2020 for me, where Stossel had gone, in moments later. And so on the phone call, he says to me, Terry O'Neill says, "Hey, John, we're starting a new division here at CBS Sports. And I've seen your work live on camera. We think you'd be a good fit for what we're doing over here at CBS Sports Network." And I said, at first I thought it was a prank. I'm looking around to see if there's anybody else on the wall phone, And so I said, "Well, Terry, I think you may have the wrong guy." He goes, "Ha, why?" And I said, "Well, because I can't name 3 NBA teams. I don't even know the rules of baseball, really." And so he goes, "Oh, no. We're there's kind of stuff we have in mind for you. Most people don't even know the rules to it. And you'd be living pretty much in Europe and reporting on things like the Tour de France bike race," which I didn't even know what that was, downhill skiing. You'd be going to places like Austria. I moved to this whole thing. He was like offer stacking for me, something. And I was like, wow, I don't know. I still have a year left on my contract. Because, well, we've already talked to the guys at CBS, and they think it'd be a nice move for you. And I'm like, but I just don't. I mean, I don't know. I'd have to think about it. And then Van Gordon Sauter says, "John, we've been watching your tapes of your broadcast. We've noticed that you seem really bored on the air." And I'm like, "What?" He goes, "Yeah, I mean, your delivery, just to be honest, you just seem like you're bored and you need to change." And when he said that, he spoke the truth, because I realized that I was showing. I was really showing. I was showing that I was just tired of reading the teleprompter and didn't know what I was doing, what my future held. I really wanted to be a musician, whatever. And so anyway, so I took this job, and all my friends in news were like, "What are you doing? You don't know anything about sports." But when I ended up taking that job, it was the best thing for my music career. But what I soon discovered was that all these producers, whether it was John Faratzis or David Dinkins or the legendary David Michaels, who produced the Tour de France, all of these guys needed music for their sporting events. And so it was like in return for them teaching me how to be a play-by-play broadcaster, I actually scored their events. And they said, "Well, we can't pay you for this." And I said, "It's okay. I'll just keep the publishing." And that's really how my music career got started.
So good. I do want to talk with you quickly about the feedback, which you kind of talked about briefly. So maybe we can talk about when they said you weren't being responsive to Mary Hart. And then I want to go to talk about cancer and death. Well, I read the book.
Fine. No, that's good. That's good. Don't go away, folks. Don't go away.
Yeah, so just so
let me just do the tease for you. It's like, coming up, the deadly cancer diagnosis. How did he get through it? And why was he so mean to Mary Hart? Details coming up.
Oh, well done. Well done. All right. So what did you learn? What happened?
In the Mary Hart thing?
Yeah.
Here's the funniest part. Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, the reason I'm asking is that, as you know, in the workplace, feedback is a big, big deal. And so I thought this story would be helpful for people who are struggling with either giving it or receiving it.
This was not feedback. This was a threat. But it was disguised as feedback. What happened was, and what's really funny is that when I released this book originally, Mary Hart my friend said, "I want to do an interview with you on Entertainment Tonight." neither one of us were still working, but they went crazy. They're like, "You guys need to host the whole show, as old people." And so they left that part out. So it was implied. So I was like, fine. And I told this story that I'm about to tell you, and she knew nothing about it. And I thought she was in on it, but she wasn't. What happened was, I had come from sports, right? I got the Entertainment Tonight job just on a bad audition, and being told that the sports I was doing at CBS were probably going to be phased out because another Terry O'Neill had left and another group had come in. I was like the original hired guy, So, Entertainment Tonight found an old tape of mine anchoring the news in Nashville, and they contacted me and they said, "We're looking for a newsier approach to our show, Entertainment Tonight." And I said, "What's that?" Because I'd been living in Europe most of the time. I had no idea what they were talking about. And they said, "Well, 25 million people a night watch it. It's a pretty impressive show." They were mad at me. And so I went for the audition. I showed up at the audition. I had, I was dressed. I had gained like, I don't know how many pounds since Nashville. And so I did this audition with Mary. I was terrible. I was loud. Mary said, "Oh, you're too loud." I was still doing downhill skiing commentary, celebrating a birthday today, like, whoa. Long story short, I ended up getting the job. But when I got there, I was still the news and sports guy. And in fact, I had been groomed to be mean. This sounds terrible. I'm taking responsibility off of me, but I had so many people from CBS Sports and CBS News and all these guys, "What are you doing?" And I know that the people at Paramount probably got the same thing about, why are you doing a half hour of just entertainment news? It was like there were closet Entertainment Tonight watchers. People didn't want to admit that they were watching that much entertainment. Nobody was reporting. There was no internet or anything. There were phones, So I got there and I had a little bit of an edge. Also, I mean, they signed me to a 13-week contract, that was it. It was like, okay, we could renew it if it works out. But I got there and Mary was Mary Hart. I mean, she was amazing, right, at her job. She was the franchise there, and nobody's ever been, as popular as she was on that show. But sometimes she would say this stuff, and we'd laugh about it now. She'd say this stuff. She'd go, "Oh my gosh, John, these guys, they must be friends. They look like they're friends off screen as well." Talking about actresses, and I just couldn't take it. I'm like, yeah, I guess. I don't know. How do you know that? And I go on to the next story. Or she'd say something that I just wasn't cool enough for me, I thought. And so I would I'd like, "Yeah, Mary," like that. I'd turn my back, and there were just enough of something in my face and certainly in my body language. I have a large body. They were getting bad feedback. I mean, these guys, this was an important show. It was 23 to 25 million people were watching this. It was making a boatload of money. I mean, remember that back in the day, you couldn't get entertainment news anywhere except for the tabloids. You're like, well, is this real? And so all of a sudden, all of the TV and movie studios wanted their stuff to be on there. You couldn't even see, back in the day, back in 1986, when I started, the only way to see a movie trailer was to see it in the movie theater or on Entertainment Tonight. So we got everybody in there just throwing money. So Mary, you're talking about, that was a racehorse that nobody should be messing with, right? They just won, what do you call that thing when you win all three of them? The grand champion. See, I know nothing about sports. It was you win all three and then you got that thing. So something comes.
Triple Crown?
Oh yeah. Did you get somebody say that in your ear? Did somebody say that in your ear? Okay.
No.
I
just got super loud.
I just wanted to know.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm doing this thing, and all of a sudden they call me into the office. Lucy Salhaney, who and I just talked to her recently too, who hired me out of an old tape in Nashville, says to me, "Hey, listen, we're getting some really bad complaints about you." And I'm like, "Oh gosh, what did I do?" And so she says, in our last focus group, people are saying you're being mean. You know what a focus group, you do, you know what it is, but people who don't know is, they get a bunch of people, they pay them $50 and put them into a room with one-way glass, and then they play Entertainment Tonight clips for them, and they say, "What do you think about this guy? What do you think about that guy? What do you think about his tie?" You never get to see that, but you hear about it. And so in fact, apparently they were inundated by, "Well, it doesn't look like John likes Mary very much." So they said, they called me in and said, we've decided to send you to a body language school in Dallas. And I'm like, "What?" And they said, "Yeah, we've got reports that you're just not being friendly to Mary." I said, "Yes, I am. I love Mary. We're good friends." "Well, you're not showing it on the air, and we've already booked you in to your plane ticket is here. You're gonna leave on Friday morning. You'll go Friday, Saturday, Sunday." Well, I think it was Lillian Glass was the body language coach. And I said, "Well, I'm not doing that. That's ridiculous. That's embarrassing." I said, "Well, you can't keep your job unless you go." So I went, and I get there, and this body language coach has been provided by Paramount, of course. VHS, like a stack of VHS tapes with time codes of where I had been mean to Mary. And so we went through, and it was so painful. We're watching these things, and she's pausing it, going, see, it was almost like she had showing a play on football. See where he came out of there and then got tackled? See what you did right there? You did that, and then you did this, and then you did that. This was like a day and a half of that. By that time, I was like, all right, well, I'm done. And she goes, okay, now I've got these scripts. I'm going to be Mary. You're going to be John, and we're going to change this. And it was so creepy. I mean, it was so ridiculous. But I really had a revelation that I later used to be a better husband, of really bad body language, and really just, I needed to come to the end of myself. And it wasn't just because I wanted to keep the job. Yes, it was mostly because I wanted to keep the job. But it was also like, I don't want to be that person. And it changed. And when I told Mary this story, she's like, wow, they never said anything to me. And I said, to their credit. And she goes, but yeah, you were a jerk for a long period of time. And I said, you could have gotten me fired. And she goes, yeah, but I thought you had potential. I mean, that's Mary. She's so sweet.
Wow. What a great story. Okay. Now let's talk about the cancer. So,
okay, fine. Sure. Oh, gotta go.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So just, headline is 2015, you're diagnosed with cancer. You beat it back. You get more in 2020. I would love for you to talk about what meaning you've made of this experience.
It changes. It seems to change about, every week or so, because I remember, I can get back there and I can remember the feeling when Connie and I got the news that I had a rare form of prostate cancer. It didn't make any blood markers. And so it was building while not showing off, and so my doctor, Dr. Steve Galen, who did a digital rectal exam, which a lot of people don't get, it's the hand glove exam. He felt a difference in my prostate. It wasn't smooth anymore. There were some bumps and things. And so that initial diagnosis was then a sonogram, and then a biopsy, and then radical prostatectomy surgery at Johns Hopkins from Dr. Ted Schaefer. And then, some lymph nodes got left behind. Those showed up. We had another biopsy. And so it was when we first got the news in 2015, it was like you might imagine, the doctor told us to get our affairs in order. So not Dr. Schaefer, but a doctor in Los Angeles. Dr. Schaefer was the one who said to me, I treat aggressive prostate cancer aggressively, and I can save your life. And he did. But it was a couple of, there's so many things to say, but I thought it was gone, and then it wasn't. And then I ended up having chemo, and then another surgery. And then we'll get to October 2020, which was really a bad time. But during that period of time, I became a cancer patient. At one point, I became a cancer patient, gave up, got my affairs in order, like he told me. Got my insurance in order, and then I became a cancer patient with an attitude, and thought that people should pity me. And during that period of time, I was drinking too much. I was drinking scotch, and I was taking drugs because I could get anything I wanted. I was the terminal cancer patient. I became that person, and so I was taking Vicodin for the pain. I was taking Ativan for the nausea, and I was chasing it with scotch. And at that point, through all of this, my wife was with me, and she was trying to titrate her guidance by not pushing too far, but to also show me love. And then in this studio right now, where I'm in right now, she was cleaning up something, or I was doing something, and I became toe to toe. And I think I'd had a drink or something. And she just said to me, that's it. You got to stop. I'm done. I've invested in you, and you're killing yourself, and I'm not going to have it. And we got into a really bad argument. And I said things that I just, in anger, that I just shouldn't have said, and I left. I realized that I was making this family miserable. And I thought, it's the funniest thing. I thought back to my days as an athlete and as a broadcaster of the Tour de France bike race. I had a bicycle, but I went and bought a new bicycle, and like a road bike with saddlebags and all this stuff on it and everything. And I put my radio show in the saddlebags and a Bible. And I just headed out on a 140-mile bike ride. And I just wanted to get my head together. And by the way, I thought I was the victim. I did. I thought I was the victim. About 20 miles up into this bike ride, totally sober and just, exhausted. I called my wife on the phone and begging for forgiveness and crying, And so I said, I just want to come home. I'm so sorry. I'm going to change. This is, I don't want to be a cancer patient. And so she said, no, you got to finish your ride. So crap, and that's the Italian way, right? No, sorry. I forgive you, but you're not coming back in this house until you, and it was what I needed. She, she knew it. But during that period of time too, right after that was when we started, a friend of ours, Cha-Cha Sandoval, handed us a CD of this evangelist who was talking about a better way to pray. And in that CD by Andrew Womack, he spoke of Mark 11:23, which is, whoever says to this mountain, be removed and be cast into the sea, and does not doubt in his heart, but believes that what he says will be done, shall have what he says. This was Jesus talking. And then the promise in Isaiah 53, by his stripes you are healed, and the same in 1 Peter 2:24, and then the same message. And then in Proverbs 18:21, which I'm always talking about, death and life are in the power of the tongue. So we completely changed the way we pray. I was clean. Clean of cancer, clean of everything, clean of cancer. And this ride was really tremendous. I mean, it really just ripped me apart, up 140 miles in 2 days. I mean, I wasn't trained for this, but it's a good thing to do, because the exercise is the thing that, and my legs still worked, even though I was sick from chemo, the legs still worked. And then October 2020, right in the middle of COVID, I started having really bad pain in my pelvis and my legs, and went for a scan, and these two big tumors, and one of them had wrapped around my kidney. It basically killed my right kidney. It was a tumor inside my bladder, and I could barely walk, and went back to MD Anderson, to the guy who was treating me, Dr. Christopher Logothetis, who looks just like Dr. Christopher Logothetis, right? He's the foremost prostate cancer oncologist in the world. And when he's not practicing, he builds sailboats. He builds a sailboat, and then he sails it back to Greece to visit his family. It's like, who is this guy? Anyway, so he said, John, we can fix this. Because he was never about killing the cancer. He was about giving you more time, And so he put me on another regimen. There were new drugs, and it was a form of chemo, but not as invasive. And so the difference between that, we're talking about the difference in who I was through this whole journey. The difference between 2015 and 2020, October, was that Connie and I had already been through everything that we could have possibly, imagined. Our faith was renewed. We knew what the drugs were. We knew what the path was. We knew how to pray. And so when this happened, it was like, okay, let's go. Get on put on the full armor of God. Get back in the foxhole. Let's get going. And so back in the gym, working out hard, listening to the doctor, going to Bible study, and seeing myself well. Once I used my imagination and knew that I could see myself on the other side of it, I realized, oh my gosh, I'm doing the same thing I did when I started live at Red Rocks, where I could see myself on that stage. I could see the orchestra with me. I could see all of it, and then amplified by my faith, I could absolutely see myself as a healed and whole human being. We just took care of it. We took care of it together, and I'm healed. And if, I believe in my future, but if something were to happen again, we take care of it. You can't sit home and eat Ritz crackers and hope everything is going to be fine, which I love Ritz crackers. But that's what happened was we as a team. And let me tell you, it built the most amazing love story between the two of us, married for nearly 30 years.
Yeah, I have to say to everybody who's listening to this, one of the things you will love about John's book is the story of your love story, and not only that you love each other, but you genuinely like each other, and just that friendship that you have. So,
and I love to, and by the way, I love to build stuff, as you know. My wife is like, would you please just retire or something? And we have 3 grandkids now under the age of 9, so there's that. And so I've been working on something for 2 years, which is, it sort of takes everything that I've done and Connie has done and my son Gib and everything that we believe and the strategies and the routines that we all use, and put it into this thing called the warriormindset.com. I mean, it's a great name, the Warrior Mindset. It's about how to live the warrior life in everything that you do, with your faith, with your morning routine, with your kids, with any sickness that might come upon you. And I think we'll probably be releasing it. We will be releasing it soon. I just don't know when, but it's called, you can check it out. It's called the warriormindset.com.
Okay, that was one of the things I was going to ask you is what do you want people to do after listening to this interview? And so it sounds like number one, buy your book Relentless, and number two, check out the warriormindset.com. Is that right?
When you get there, you'll see like 1,300 of the videos that we've done as a family, me and Connie and Gib.
Wow.
And also, live cut-ins, in different parts of the day, because Lance Armstrong, I once did a long interview with him, and actually Lance owns one of my songs, because whatever you think about all the doping and all the rest of that stuff, but Lance's heart is still for helping kids, and we donated one of our songs to his to his ministry. But I said, "Why are you doing all this?" And he said, I asked it a little more elegantly, like maybe the way you asked about his formative years. I said, "Why?" And he goes, "Because I have the obligation of the cure. I have the obligation of God's healing to tell people about it."
Music is one of your greatest loves. Is there anything you'd like to sing? A few bars of something?
Oh, you don't want me to sing. I sort of sing, big
Do you want
band
to play
tunes.
something?
I can't get to the piano. Can I get to the piano? I can sing big band tunes because the range is like 4 notes. For me, anyway. It's like, somewhere beyond the seas, there's somewhere waiting for me. That thing. I'm walking to the piano. Now, you have to understand that this piano. There's so much junk in the studio because we just finished this big event. And this piano's out of tune. So my fault. Here's a song that from Red Rocks. That I listen to, actually myself. I listen to my own music sometimes. That the middle section of it is sort of the victorious part of getting out of. I wrote it, getting out of cancer. I wrote it on Bastille Day back in 1982, something like that, in France, as part of the Tour de France. But it goes like this. Oh my gosh! Somebody's gonna say to you, "Get a piano tuner, will you please?" I feel like I'm in a bar in a Western. All right, just give me a whiskey and a beer. But here's a song that a lot of your listeners will recognize.
Okay, go.
It's the most. I put two of my kids through college, and also it's so much fun to play because anytime the NBA comes on, you hear it. It goes on and on and on. But
that's you.
That's the NBA basketball team. Yeah,
I love it. Okay. Thank you for that treat. 2 final questions for you. What was most useful to you in this conversation? And what intelligence for your life did you discover?
You don't have to write a book, but that journaling is probably a good idea. I know we didn't even use the word journaling, but it's really when you were asking these great questions, and by the way, people who may not know this, is most people, with apologies to people who have interviewed me before, most people they're busy, let's say, will just sort of pull up your Wikipedia page and they ask the questions all the way down the Wikipedia page. You really did research, which was so honoring to me. You even read the book, which is crazy. But I learned from reading the book that all of that data that we talk about on Intelligence for Your Life is real. That journaling and journaling with gratitude it can really lift you up. It can change your future. And so when I first got the offer to write the book for HarperCollins, they said, "We know you're busy, John. We're going to hire a ghostwriter, and what he'll do is he'll interview you and transcribe it, and then he'll write some stuff, and you can see if you like it or not." The guy was really, really nice, and I loved doing it. But and by the way, this book was supposed to take 6 months. It was 2.5 years. I went to them and I said, "I know you're going to hate me. We're going to miss the publishing date, but I really want to write this myself." And there was a conference call, and there was a big delay before anybody said anything. But Matt Baher, who is at HarperCollins, said, "I think this is the right thing, John." And so, yeah, it took me 2.5 years. And during that period of time, I was still battling all kinds of stuff. But that was my journaling. I went back and looked at I was forced to look at my life. I even had to call up people, whether it was Steve Thomas or Scott White, who gave me that first job. Scott White, who gave me that first job at WKIX Radio, he ended up sitting next to me in New York City a few years back when I was inducted into the Radio Hall of Fame. I was able to thank him at that ceremony. But I called him up and said, what was I doing? Or John Stossel, from CBS. "Oh, no, John. No, you were this, because you start writing your own history, rewriting it, right?" And so when I went back, it was this amazingly cathartic experience. And I realized this is what I'm doing as I'm journaling. And so when I look back, I thought there's just no question that the Holy Spirit had a hold of me and was holding my hand and saying, and just providing opportunities, providing, energy, vision for my future, my imagination, expectation, and all of that. Because a guy who's homeless in a tent, pumping gas, and 3 years later, through a chain of events that's just impossible. In fact, people have written about this, is anchoring the news at WCBS TV at 23 years old. It doesn't happen, and so, yeah, I worked hard, but I do not prefer the word luck, not at all. And Angela Duckworth doesn't either, who wrote that book, Grit. It was it was grit, it was desperation, and it was a belief in God.
Any final thoughts?
I really love this interview. I'll play a song that my grandkids love this song because when they can't go to sleep at night. It's an Italian song, and I don't know what somebody will know what the translation is, but it's Nina Noni, Grandma loves the grandkids. Nina Noni, Grandma loves the grandkids. Nina, and it goes on like this, and they pretend that they're falling asleep, and then when I realize they're not going to go to sleep, it's like Nina Noni, Grandma loves the grandkids. Nina Noni, Grandma loves the grandkids. And then they start running around, and my wife is like, "Oh gosh, what have you done now?"
John, thank you so much. It's been a delight.
It was my pleasure. It was great therapy, and I'm going to just start asking people what is their formative thing.
4 key takeaways from our conversation. Number 1, the gifts of imperfection. We can all relate to John's formative experiences in one way or another. We are not perfect. Our parents are not perfect. The environment we grow up in isn't perfect. But overcoming challenges here is what makes us who we are. The imperfect mold his parents set for him is ultimately what compelled John to take risks and gave him the tools he needed to forge his own path. Number 2, sometimes breaking rules and asking for forgiveness later is a viable strategy. We've talked about rule breaking before, and in John's case, he did everything wrong during those days as a homeless college flunk out. But his passion to get on the air could not be contained. He broke into the radio studio. He cut up broadcast tapes so he could get his voice on the air. These crimes, as he called them, were what got his voice and talents in front of key decision makers. If you're doing everything by the book and not making the progress you want to make, see if there's a rule you can bend. Within reason, of course. Number 3, you might not know when you've hit mastery on your own S-curve. John shared a very interesting moment when his boss told him he looked bored doing his daily news broadcast. There will be someone in your life, a friend, a colleague, a partner, who can see you better than you can see yourself. Always keep your ear out for the advice that will lead to your next curve. Number 4, don't be a victim. When John stopped seeing himself as a victim of cancer, he mustered the will to fight it. He stopped drinking, taking unnecessary drugs, and pushed his body to places it hadn't been. He stopped seeing himself as a cancer patient and visualized himself as someone who could beat it. There's lots of science that shows this mentality is so important. And for John, the stakes couldn't be higher. But no matter what hardship you're trying to overcome, stop dwelling on the problem and visualize what it looks like when it's conquered. This will reveal what you need to do to tackle it. If you're looking for additional episodes, re-listen to Take the Right Risks, episode 100, Marcus Whitney on visualization in episode 188, and Stephen Nelson, episode 122, Livingston Taylor, episode 177, because, well, music. If you would like a copy of John's book, email me at wj@whitneyjohnson.com and share with me a reflection from this conversation. We will make 5 available to you. I read and respond to every note. Thank you again to John Tesh for being our guest. Thank you for listening. Thank you to our producer, Matt Silverman, audio engineer and editor, Whitney Job, assistant producer, Steve Ludwig, and production assistant, Maddie McDaniel. I'm Whitney Johnson, and this is Disrupt Yourself.
Disruption.